Guys, Mualani is the first new 5-star we'll be getting in the Nathan patch, and I have to say, she's a quite peculiar one. Throughout the weeks of beta, she underwent a few substantial nerfs, so most people haven't been able to decide on how good she is yet, but in this video I will try to give you full clarity on what to expect. So, first things first, Mualani is a Hydro main DPS of the highest degree. She's kinda like Nuvolette in a way, in that she will produce most of the team damage pretty much always, but her teams will be relying on her own damage more than Nuvolette's do on his, because she's a vape carry, which means that more often than not, her teams will be filled with characters that are meant to magnify her damage rather than contributing to the team output themselves. I'll go more in depth on this later, but the bottom line is that by getting Mualani, you're getting a main DPS that can sustain the entirety of the team weight by herself. The similarities with Nuvolette don't just end with the role, as her damage is entirely HP scaling, a common thing for a Hydro character nowadays. Her base HP is even higher than Nuvolette's, so she's off to a good start. But let's go back to her big damage. The thing that enables her to achieve such results is an elemental skill, which makes her hop on a shark board and just surf around while hitting opponents. In terms of mobility, this ups her speed by a bit compared to other characters' normal movements, but probably not to an extent where it makes a huge difference in combat. The cool part, however, are the damage mechanics tied to hit and how you can activate them. She's a normal attack damage dealer, with the normal attacks being shark bites, and each of these attacks is a cooldown of a bit less than 2 seconds. This means she attacks at a very low frequency compared to most other characters in the game. From this alone, you can understand why she's designed to be played on vape teams, since it also means that her Hydro application is rather slow throughout the windows, and there are plenty of pyro players that can enable elemental reactions for her as a result. It's not only that, however, because obviously this low frequency design also plays to her strengths kit-wise. In fact, while she's surfing, if she goes in contact with opponents, she will gain a stack. This stack increases her normal attack damage, and she can get up to 3 per normal attack. It's not only that she can though, she wants to get 3 stacks as many times as possible, since the 3rd stack by itself will increase her normal attack output by an enormous amount. Now, the idea of bumping into opponents a couple times before each normal attack can sound a bit weird, if not awkward. Combined with how unique her movement is due to the shark board, I can definitely see how this kind of playstyle could intimidate people in a way, since it's much less input intuitive compared to characters that can constantly keep their attacks going on opponents. It's definitely something that you'll have to adapt to, but personally, if I have to be honest, I don't think it's that bad really. First, if you're facing more than one opponent, it will be rather easy to get stacks, as it will be easier to bump into at least one of them constantly as opposed to when you're facing just one of them. For single target scenarios, it might seem trickier, but in reality it's not bad in this case either, since single target mostly means boss fights. So, cases where you're facing an opponent with a big hitbox that you can easily stay close to keep getting stacks. In particular, very big ones that don't move around like the algorithm will just wall Mualani and allow her to get stacks even if she just gets stuck onto him. So while I get how the playstyle might be a turn off for many people, I think it's just a matter of getting adjusted to it really. Moreover, her interruption resistance is very high during her elemental skill, and she straight up can't get interrupted while she's using her normal attacks, so the quality of life in this sense is pretty great. One worry you might have just looking at the footage though is that her hits look rather single target oriented, and that's true, the shark bites themselves don't have that big of a range. To counterbalance this, she's got this very cool mechanic where if she uses a full stack normal attack, she will hit up to 5 nearby enemies that have been marked by her beforehand. To mark them, Mualani has to simply bump into them when surfing, which should happen naturally during her windows. This side damage is pretty significant. It becomes lower the more opponents she's hitting with it, but it stops at 72% of the original hit, which is still a pretty massive amount, especially since it's sort of a guaranteed AoE blow. Without this, she will kind of be like a Hydro Futo equivalent, while with this you can at least get to levels of wide range damage where the other Hydro carry, Nuvolette, doesn't completely overshadow her. Specifically, since we're talking about a vape carry that does a lot of damage every hit, I think that in a lot of situations you will just be able to one-shot an entire wave of opponents with a single blow at high investment. Lastly, her elemental burst. just a very strong Hydra attack that has no side effect, but honestly that's all it needs to be impressive. If vaped, this attack will hit for even 400,000 damage at free-to-play investment in some setups, meaning it gives her even more insane single hit potential than her normal attacks already did. It has an energy cost of 60, so it's not the easiest ability to handle in terms of energy requirements depending on the team, but it's an essential part of her damage output that will be very significant even when you can use it just once every 2 rotations. In terms of talent priority, however, her elemental skill still takes precedence, since the attacks during her stance are just overwhelmingly superior in damage overall to her burst. Note that her damage during the skill doesn't scale off of the normal attack talent in any way, so don't make the mistake to level up the normal attack talent, unless you hate yourself and want to play Mualani in a normal attack spam way, that is. Having said this, if I had to talk to you about a character that has similar characteristics to Mualani and is currently in the game, it wouldn't be really easy because she's so unique, but if I really had to pick one, that would be Gaming. The reason is that he's a character that only attacks every few seconds with his main elemental skill plunge attacks, and in general his attack frequency is rather slow even if you add extra plunges through other means. On the flip side, basically every single attack of his it's like a literal nuke, mainly because the slow frequency of his attacks allows him to trigger melt or vaporize reactions on almost each one of his hits. Mualani is the same, she won't attack much, but every time she does, she will unleash a devastating blow on the opponents, without even exaggerating. Each of her full stack normal attacks will hit for a couple hundred damage at free-to-play investment, so she's definitely a satisfying prospect if you're interested in a character with very high screenshot damage. That said, her low frequency, combined with the fact that you have to get stacks before each normal attack, and with the fact that her elemental skill has limited time duration, can realistically make her output fluctuate depending on how you play her or how the enemies move, for example. The average should be of 3 full stack normal attacks per rotation, which would result in a level of DPS that is pretty similar to what high-tier damage dealers can typically achieve in Genshin. She can potentially get even more if you're in a situation where it's easy to get stacks and you're absolutely frame perfect in execution, but she can also realistically get less if you're facing enemies that move around a lot. In this sense, she's pretty similar to Hu Tao, where her theoretical ceiling is very high, but the practice might tell a different story depending on the scenario. Now let's jump to her teams, but first let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. So, teams. As I mentioned earlier, she really wants to be used on vape teams specifically because of how they play to her strengths kit design-wise. You can potentially play her on reaction-less compositions that are typically strong, like Mono Hydra with Fiorina, but it's a case where the team will be strong more because of how awesome the base concept is, rather than because of what Mualani is adding compared to alternatives. So, vape. In order to vape, she wants someone on the team that can constantly apply pyro to opponents. If you look at a few other cases of a Hydro main damage dealer vaping, their compositions always needed an awesome pyro application method, such as Xianling or combinations of Jean and Bennett. This is mostly due to how quickly Hydro application depletes the pyro aura after a vape reaction. Mualani is different, however, because she doesn't attack a lot, and this means she will do fine even with a more modest pyro applier. Note that I'm saying this based on the footage I've seen, so I'm not just speaking theoretically here. Matter of fact, even characters like Dei and Xinyan will apply enough pyro that she won't have many issues vaping on a single target at least. Both of them can apply pyro continuously to her elemental skill, which is nice because it means it won't be tied to energy requirements for them. For Xinyan, using her burst is still nice since it instantly creates the strongest version of her shield, but for Deia, it's pretty much irrelevant. Speaking about shields, both of these characters offer defensive utility, so it means that on Mualani team specifically, they cover multiple roles, which is more than what they can do usually on other teams. While they should theoretically work fine by themselves, it's still good to pair them with units that can enhance that pyro application of theirs, like Dendro characters through burning or Anemo characters through pyro infusion. The single target damage of these setups looks pretty impressive at free-to-play investment, but for the most part it will just be Mualani carrying the load. This is because she simply doesn't have many fitting damage dealing allies, since most of them will proc elemental reactions on the pyro aura that will disrupt its consistency, so it's much more beneficial to go for supports that can increase her damage while keeping things consistent. Units like Candace come to mind since she gives active characters a normal attack damage bonus to her burst. In this regard, it's technically better not to have her Constellations Generation 6 unlocked here, since it gives her burst continuous attack properties which can disrupt the pyro application for the reason I explained before. The strongest variants I've calculated for these teams are definitely the Mona ones though. Mona is one of the strongest supports in the game in terms of how she can buff characters in a small window. While she can't buff the entirety of Mualani's output with her burst, even if she just manages to magnify 1 or 2 hits, it would be really good, especially if you have her Constellation 1 activated, which further increases the supportive capabilities. Alternatively, you can play teams with Xiangling as the pyro player. The thing with Xiangling is that she can have really high energy requirements on teams that don't focus on battering her properly. I'm talking about 250 energy recharge or more in this case, and even that might not be enough in many cases, since you will find yourself in situations where rotations can get cut short due to Mualani's high one-shot potential, making Xiangling potentially inconsistent as a result. Still, it's worth mentioning them as options nonetheless. Since Xiangling is a much better pyro player than the characters I mentioned before, you can take more liberties here in terms of which characters you bring in the team while still being able to vape with Mualani. Also, it's likely that with a character like Xiangling, she will be able to vape in AoE more consistently than with a character like Xinyan, so it's definitely a factor to consider. Overall, her team situation is decent but not great, because she's still a work in progress character that is still waiting for a perfect buffer, maybe a perfect pyro player that will be the Pyro Archon, who knows. Still, it seems that she will be able to do great stuff even with the little she has available currently. Now, regarding her builds, artifacts wise there is a lot that must be said, mostly in terms of what she prefers in terms of stats. First, let me state that she gets a lot of crit rate for free, mainly crit rate as sentence stat, but secondarily the new Nathan DPS set that is basically managed to stay on steroids, as it provides some damage bonuses, but more importantly 40% crit rate consistently. Even ignoring the crit rate thing for a second, however, it's still quite the mess. As a vape carry, she naturally lacks elemental mastery, but if she's already getting EM from teammates and/or weapons, HP will be more valuable. HP is strong enough for her that it can even be better to use an HP circlet rather than a crit damage circlet if she's also using a crit damage weapon, but this can change if she's also receiving external HP buffs like from Hydro Resonance. Honestly, my advice is you just have to use an optimizer to figure out which the best builds are for your specific case. Her set situation is much more universal, however, as the set I just talked to you about just destroys any other artifact, to the point that if you don't have it, you'll be missing out damage comparable that if you're missing out her signature weapon. Definitely something to keep in mind considering it's a new set, so you won't be able to get great pieces of it right away. Weapons wise, as an HP scaling unit, she has pretty limited options just like Neuvillette. Her signature is really strong, as it provides high crit damage, damage bonus and HP percent, so it ranks much higher than possible alternatives. Sacrificial Jade at high investment will most likely be comparable to it if Mualani didn't also have such high crit rate, which will cause her to overcap on crit pretty much every time she's using Jade. Still, the weapon is absurd enough at R5 passive wise that it still ranks very highly regardless of that. Alternatively, more free-to-play option like the weight set or the new Nathan craftable will suffice and typically be enough for Mualani to be pretty strong. Lastly, as usual, her first few constellations are great. They are quite extensive in their wording, but the bottom line is that they will allow Mualani to throw extra attacks and make them substantially stronger too. Overall, if you can get to this level of investment and maybe the signature, you will really feel it, because Mualani is the type of hyper carry that is really selfish and makes up for like 90% of the team damage in many cases. To end this video, I would say Mualani is a pretty great addition to the meta. Maybe not to the level of Arlecchino or Neuvillette, but like right below, probably. In terms of straight damage, she can sort of compete with them, but her teams are worse in terms of utility, her own quality of life is also worse in my opinion, so she's a bit below them, I will say. Still, a great pull if you're looking for a strong DPS that also has a unique gameplay. And I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and also go check the Emily post-release analysis I made a few days ago. Bye bye!